Marilyn Monroe, draped in millions of dollars of designer silk, fled her own Hollywood premiere at 2 o'clock in the morning, desperate to escape the relentless pressure of her famous life. She pulled her car into a forgotten, flickering diner, searching for a moment of peace, but instead found a single waitress whose secret struggle demanded an impossible act of grace that would shock the world. The premiere was a triumph, a cascade of applause and laughter that sounded to Marilyn exactly like the emptiness she felt inside. She smiled and tilted her head at the correct angle, her hip leading the eye, but beneath the exterior, she was counting the seconds until she could escape the role of a lifetime. The dress, a shimmering column of silk, felt like a straitjacket, binding her emotionally. She watched her date, a studio executive, laughing, oblivious to the panic tightening in her chest. Every gesture was judged, consumed by the machine of Hollywood. All she wanted in that moment was to be a ghost, invisible, to simply stop performing. It was precisely 2 o'clock in the morning when the escape plan materialized, less of a plan and more of a primal urge. She slipped away during a moment of chaos, a spilled champagne flute near the coat check. Her security detail missed the quiet woman who walked out a side door into the cool Los Angeles air. The studio had provided a black sedan driven by a chauffeur named Arthur. Marilyn found Arthur outside, slumped sleepily behind the wheel. She did not wake him, but reached gently into his pocket for the keys. She slid into the driver's seat, pulling a silk scarf from her handbag, wrapping it tightly around her famous blonde hair, hiding it beneath the collar of an oversized coat. As she drove away from the dazzling lights of the premiere, the silence inside the car was a profound relief. The city, usually a snarling beast, had settled into the strange, quiet hum of the pre-dawn hours. She drove without destination, seeking the farthest point from where Marilyn Monroe was expected to be. She passed grand estates and darkened exclusive clubs. Then, out beyond the controlled glamour, she saw it, a tiny, independently owned diner whose neon sign, the Starlight, flickered, shedding a pale, welcoming light onto the empty street. It was anonymous, worn, and wonderfully unremarkable. It was the only place where she could hope to find Norma Jean again. The simple thought of ordering coffee from a waitress who didn't know her name, who didn't care about box office returns, was suddenly the most compelling draw. She pulled the borrowed car into a dusty parking spot near the back, feeling the intense pull of genuine hunger, a physical feeling the endless rounds of canapes had never satisfied. She took one last look in the rearview mirror, checking that the scarf and the coat successfully obscured the icon, and then she opened the car door. The weight of the diamond was gone, replaced by the weight of the moment. She stepped out of the vehicle and into the darkness, moving toward the diner's weak, beckoning light. This was not a stunt. This was a woman desperate for a breath of authentic air. She had successfully escaped the party, but now the real journey began. She was about to meet a person who needed her more than any audience ever could, though she did not know it yet. The silence of the Starlight Diner felt like a physical presence, a soothing cloak thrown over the exposed nerves of the world's most famous woman. She pushed open the glass door, and the bell above it chimed weakly, a sound so lonely it might have been the midnight voice of Los Angeles. The air inside was thick with the scent of old coffee, burnt toast, and the quiet comfort of simple sustenance. This was not the perfection of a Hollywood set. This was real, flawed, and utterly grounding. She slid into the vinyl booth farthest from the counter, pulling the collar of her borrowed coat higher, adjusting the scarf so only the shadow of her face was visible. The booth was worn smooth by years of patrons, and the anonymity of it was exhilarating. She felt a lightness in her chest she hadn't realized was missing, the lightness of not being watched. The only other person in the diner was a young woman behind the counter, leaning on the stainless steel, meticulously wiping the same section of counter with a damp cloth. This waitress moved with the heavy exhaustion of someone who had been standing too long, yet her movements were precise, dedicated to the task. She was not Hollywood glamour, but in the soft, faded light she possessed a quiet dignity. Marilyn watched her, seeing the tiny, almost imperceptible tremor in her hand, the subtle tell of deep fatigue. Finally, the waitress looked up. Her eyes, shadowed by the late hour, were startlingly kind, and she offered a gentle, practiced smile. It was the smile of someone who understood that customers at 2 a.m. were navigating their own private shipwrecks. She picked up a laminated menu and walked slowly over to Marilyn's booth. The name tag pinned crookedly to her crisp, pale blue uniform read, Sarah. "Can I get you some coffee?" Sarah asked, her voice low and smooth like a late-night radio broadcast. "It's fresh, about an hour old." Marilyn nodded, her own voice disguised by the whisper of the hour. "Just black, please, and a piece of apple pie." As Sarah turned to retrieve the coffee, Marilyn let her eyes travel over the small, vulnerable details of the woman's presentation. The uniform was starched, but the cuff was frayed where she must constantly rub against it. Her shoes, though polished, were heavily worn, holding a silent record of countless miles walked on industrial linoleum. Marilyn, paid hundreds of thousands of dollars, saw instantly that Sarah was fighting a battle far more serious than finding the right camera angle. It was the battle for existence, fought in worn shoes and through tired, cheerful smiles. Marilyn took a long, hot sip of the strong, bitter coffee. It tasted honest. For a few minutes, she was not Marilyn Monroe, the icon. She was just a woman in a quiet booth watching another woman work a difficult shift. But as Sarah returned to the counter, the illusion of peace was shattered by a tiny, almost inaudible sound that broke through the comforting silence. It was a single, dry cough Sarah tried immediately to suppress, the harsh, tired sound of worry that catches in the throat. Marilyn felt a sudden, deep empathy, a pull back to her own past struggles. She wanted to know the story behind those tired eyes, the reality hiding behind that kind, weary smile. She knew a mask when she saw one, and Sarah's was built not of studio lights, but of sheer, exhausting necessity. If this glimpse into the quiet, compassionate heart of Marilyn Monroe touches you, hit that subscribe button to ensure you don't miss the powerful moments when the world's greatest icons showed their most human side. Marilyn watched as Sarah went back to the counter, resting her forehead momentarily against the cool stainless steel. The waitress was clearly wrestling with a private burden, a weight that eclipsed the diamond necklace Marilyn had left behind. The peace of the midnight hour was about to be broken by Sarah's looming, whispered tragedy. The pain was not in the words Sarah had spoken, but in the single small detail she had revealed. The 7-year-old daughter who needed care, and that sound echoed in Marilyn's mind, triggering a memory that was cold and sharp. Her exhaustion was not just from the 16 hours she had worked that day. It was the bone-deep weariness of a mother fighting an invisible, relentless battle. Her 7-year-old daughter, Lily, was confined to her bed with a persistent, serious respiratory illness, and the specialized, prescribed, inhaled medication cost $75 per dose, a price Sarah simply could not meet. Her husband, David, a decent man and a mechanic, had recently sustained a severe hand injury and was unable to work, meaning the waitressing tips were the only thing standing between their family and total collapse. Sarah had received a final stark notice that afternoon. The rent was $1,530 past due, and the eviction process would begin in 72 hours. As Sarah walked toward the worn kitchen door, she pressed a hand briefly against her midsection, not from physical pain, but from the cold knot of financial panic. She was running on 2 cups of weak instant coffee and the desperate hope that a single customer, any customer, would leave a tip large enough to cover Lily's next prescription refill. She carefully avoided looking at the cash register, knowing the $23.50 inside represented a terrifying inadequacy. Marilyn watched this quiet performance, and her heart ached with recognition. This wasn't the desperation of an actress hoping for a role. This was the terror of a woman hoping for survival. Marilyn knew that fear intimately. She remembered the days as Norma Jean when a $5 bill felt like the difference between dignity and despair. She remembered the shame of hunger and the cold of eviction notices. Sarah's struggle resonated with a pure, painful echo of Marilyn's past, reminding her that fame and fortune had simply built a wall around that fear, not eliminated it entirely. Sarah returned to the counter, pouring another cup of black coffee for her silent customer. She focused on the steam rising from the mug, deliberately blocking out the image of Lily tossing in her sleep or the threatening language on the eviction notice pinned to their refrigerator. The only way through these hours, she knew, was to put on the mask of cheerfulness, to project competence, and to pretend that her world wasn't slowly dissolving around her. Marilyn watched Sarah carefully refill her own cup, noting the slight redness around the waitress's eyes, not from crying, but from the raw, abrasive stress of sleepless nights. She saw the tiny, almost invisible movement of Sarah's lips as she murmured something private and hurried before turning back to the counter. It was the sound of a strong woman finally bending under the relentless weight of reality. Marilyn set her empty coffee cup down with deliberate softness, knowing she could not leave this diner without somehow acknowledging the profound, heartbreaking story she had just witnessed, unfolding in a pale blue uniform. She knew with certainty that the woman who was about to approach her table had no idea that her life was about to intersect with the true heart of Norma Jean. Marilyn set the saucer down with the quiet weight of a decision, knowing that she was about to make a transfer of grace that Hollywood could never witness. Sarah approached the booth with the practiced rhythm of a professional, reaching for the empty cup and pie, but the moment she heard the customer's soft, unmistakable voice, every ounce of exhaustion vanished, replaced by an electric shock of recognition. Marilyn tilted her head slightly, keeping her sunglasses in place, but that tiny movement was enough. She looked up at Sarah and asked in a whisper, "Is this your usual shift, dear? It's awfully late." It was the voice that gave her away, not the breathy, public Marilyn voice, but a deeper, more vulnerable contralto, the voice of Norma Jean, rich with empathy. Sarah's hand froze above the saucer, and the knowledge hit her like a silent wave. It was her. The scarf and the coat were a shield, but the vulnerable aura that seemed to absorb all the light was impossible to hide. Sarah, a master of her own mask, returned the favor immediately. She lowered her gaze and answered in the casual, routine tone of a waitress. "Oh yes, the graveyard shift. It's quiet, but it pays the bills, you know." It was an answer designed to offer the celebrity, the anonymity she clearly craved. In that moment, Sarah recognized a shared humanity, the need to pretend everything was fine. Marilyn smiled, a small, genuine curve of the lip that didn't reach her eyes, but conveyed profound gratitude for the unspoken acknowledgement. "I suppose that's all any of us are doing, isn't it? Just trying to keep the bills paid." The exchange, so mundane on the surface, felt intensely private. Marilyn leaned forward, dropping her tone even lower. "What about you, Sarah? Do you have family waiting for you when you get home?" Sarah hesitated, her defenses momentarily lowering. She considered lying, but the kindness in the stranger's voice was disarming. "My daughter," she confessed, her voice thick with emotion she quickly swallowed down. "She's not been well. I'm just trying to make sure she has everything she needs." She regretted sharing that much, but Marilyn simply nodded, her expression unchanged, yet somehow deeper. "A mother's job is never done, is it?" Marilyn said softly, looking away toward the worn chrome reflection on the coffee machine. She was thinking of her own troubled childhood, of the countless people who had struggled to provide for her. She understood the desperation of having a child in need and empty pockets. "No," Sarah agreed, finally collecting the empty plate. "But you keep going. You always find a way." It was a statement of faith, but the tremor in her voice betrayed the immense pressure of the past week. She knew she had run out of ways. Marilyn studied the waitress's face one final time, seeing the dark circles and the forced cheer. The conversation was over, but the message was received. Sarah had quietly recognized a legend, and the legend had quietly recognized a woman facing the abyss. If you have ever recognized an icon in a quiet, unexpected moment, or felt seen by someone who truly understood your secret struggle, share your story in the comments below. Sarah turned to walk away, preparing to total the small bill, completely unaware that the famous customer in the booth was already calculating not a tip, but a lifeline, a silent, powerful reversal of fortune that was about to change everything. The pain was not in the words Sarah had spoken, but in the small details she had revealed. The 7-year-old daughter who needed care, and that sound echoed in Marilyn's mind, triggering a memory that was cold and sharp. It wasn't a memory of fame, but of the time, long before Hollywood, when Norma Jean was a small child living in foster homes, and the simple need for a warm coat felt like an impossible, distant dream. She remembered the shame of asking, the way pity felt like a slap. She remembered what it felt like to be dependent on the goodwill of strangers, and she knew that Sarah, standing in her worn shoes, would never ask for help directly. She was fighting for her daughter's dignity as much as her own. Marilyn's decision was instantaneous, absolute, and rooted in the deep empathy of her own impoverished past. This was not charity. This was a sister helping a sister across the great chasm of fortune. She reached into the large handbag, a bag that contained nearly $1,000 in cash for any emergency, a habit left over from her days of insecurity. She counted out 50 crisp $20 bills, the exact $1,000. This sum, she knew, was enough to stop the eviction process cold, buy the necessary specialized medication for Lily, and leave a little room for Sarah to simply breathe without terror for the first time in months. But the money alone was insufficient. Money offered help, but a silent act offered respect. Marilyn reached for the diner's order paper and a pencil from her bag. She quickly scribbled a few simple words, folding the note neatly around the stack of bills. She placed the money and the note together, slid them under the little ceramic coffee saucer, and then placed the final bill for the coffee and pie on top of the saucer. The arrangement was precise. The check on top, the saucer next, and the profound, life-altering gift hidden beneath. She sat back in the booth, watching Sarah at the counter, her whole body tense with the quiet enormity of what she was doing. This gesture, hidden beneath a 25-cent coffee cup, meant more to her than any premiere or standing ovation. It was a secret redemption for every time Norma Jean had needed a helping hand and found none. The weight of the moment was almost overwhelming. She knew she was about to alter the course of an entire family's future with one small, quiet movement. She took one last look at the exhausted waitress. She imagined Sarah's face when the note and the stack of money were revealed. She pictured Lily sleeping soundly, breathing easily because of this small, anonymous act in the loneliest hour of the morning. It was a beautiful fantasy, a private victory against the cruelty of poverty and illness. The moment for action, silent and swift, had arrived. She knew she could not stay to witness the aftermath. The gift was contingent on her anonymity. Marilyn pushed the little stack of paper and the saucer to the edge of the table, 100 crisp $20 bills sitting quietly beneath the porcelain, poised to shatter one woman's despair. Marilyn rose from the booth with a deliberate quietness, leaving the small arrangement of coffee cup, check, saucer, and the profound, hidden gift as the only evidence of her presence in the sleepy diner. She walked slowly toward the register, pulling a few crumpled dollar bills from her pocket, just enough to look like she was preparing to pay the small amount, ensuring the deception held. Sarah, busy, wiping down a coffee carafe, glanced up. There was a quiet nod exchanged between the two women, one the symbol of global desire, the other the emblem of local struggle. In that nod, Marilyn conveyed a silent message of shared understanding, a profound salute to the woman who carried her burden with dignity. Sarah simply said, "Thank you for stopping by," her voice polite and automatic. Marilyn did not offer a verbal farewell. She knew that any spoken word from her, any sign of extraordinary kindness, would shatter the protective anonymity she had constructed around the act. The gift was meant to be received with astonishment, not awkward gratitude. She pushed open the door, the small bell chiming its lonely signal once more, and stepped back into the 2 o'clock silence of the city. As she walked to her car, she kept her eyes fixed on the pavement, resisting the powerful urge to look back through the diner window and watch the moment of revelation. The silence that followed her departure settled over the Starlight Diner like a thick velvet curtain. For a few long moments, nothing moved. Sarah, her shift almost over, finally set down the carafe and smoothed her uniform apron. She started gathering the checkbooks and wiping down the empty booths. When she reached Marilyn's table, she sighed, the soft, weary sound of a woman who just wanted to go home and check on her child. She picked up the small paper check and started to clear the items. Her eyes scanned the surface of the table for the usual tip, a few quarters, perhaps a dollar bill, and saw nothing but the ordinary clutter. A momentary flash of disappointment, quickly suppressed, crossed her face. Then her fingers reached the stack of items. She picked up the check, then the coffee saucer, and that was when her hand paused, feeling a distinct, unusual thickness beneath the ceramic. Sarah tilted the saucer up, expecting maybe a few forgotten coins to clatter onto the table. Instead, she saw a stack of freshly folded paper nestled beneath the worn porcelain. It was the color of possibility, far too green and substantial to be an ordinary tip. Her heart started a slow, heavy thump against her ribs. She looked quickly toward the front door, half expecting the disguised customer to rush back in, apologizing for the mistake. But the street was dark and empty, and the only sound was the low hum of the refrigeration unit. Before Sarah unveils the secret note, share this story with a friend who appreciates the magic of unexpected kindness. They need to witness this revelation. She lifted the money carefully, but the precise amount and the few powerful words written by a global legend were about to strike her like a lightning bolt of grace. The folded paper, thin and brittle, felt impossibly heavy in Sarah's tired fingers, holding not just money, but the terrifying, dizzying weight of an unexpected miracle. She slowly began to unfold the note, her eyes widening as the first few bills became visible, a solid block of crisp $20 notes. Her initial thought, born of months of crushing pressure, was that the amount must be $100, an unbelievable, beautiful windfall. She counted them quickly under her breath, her heart hammering against her ribs. 100, 200, 300. By the time she reached $500, she had to lean against the booth for support, tears stinging her eyes. This was more money than she had held since her wedding day. She looked again at the door, certain the kind woman would return for her money, that this was a mistake the tired celebrity had made. But the door remained shut, reflecting only the desolate, empty street. Sarah finally focused on the small piece of order paper tucked into the bills. It was written quickly in a fluid, slightly dramatic script, the handwriting of someone accustomed to signing autographs. She read the 12 words. They were the perfect blend of empathy and instruction, delivered with the quiet authority of someone who had truly been there. No one should feel invisible. Use this to breathe. A friend who remembers hunger. The message didn't just offer money, it offered validation. It confirmed that the celebrity had seen the mask, understood the pain, and chosen to reach across the vast gulf of their respective lives to acknowledge a shared struggle. It was the deepest form of respect Sarah could have received. Then she refolded the note and started counting the money again, slowly, methodically. 600, 700, 800. Her breath caught in a silent, agonizing gasp. 900, $1,000. The amount was staggering, an immediate total solution to the looming crisis. $1,000 was enough to pay the majority of the back rent due, stop the eviction process cold, and buy enough specialized inhaled medication to last Lily for months. It was not just a tip. It was a safety net woven from compassion. The sound of Sarah's desperate gasp finally alerted the diner's short order cook, a weary man named George, who stuck his head out from the kitchen. "Everything all right out there, Sarah? You look like you saw a ghost." Sarah couldn't speak, but just held the thick stack of bills in her hand and shook her head, tears finally overflowing and streaming down her face. They were not tears of pain, but of dizzying, unbearable relief. George rushed out, saw the stack of money, and his jaw dropped. They recounted it together, spreading the $50, $20 bills out across the counter. The reality was undeniable. The owner of the diner, a gruff but fair woman named Elena, was called immediately. When Elena saw the money and read the note, she didn't question the source. She simply held Sarah's hand. The immediate knowledge that her child was safe, that her family would not be thrown onto the street, flooded Sarah's system, causing her knees to buckle. Sarah kept the paper pressed against her chest, the 12 words proving that the greatest celebrity in the world had seen her, and had answered her prayer with a truth that transcended every dollar. The short order cook, George, stood with his hands on his hips, staring at the stack of bills, shaking his head not in disbelief, but at the sheer, overwhelming kindness that had manifested in their tired, smoky diner. $1,000, George whispered, the number echoing the enormity of the gift. Who does that? Who just walks in, orders a piece of pie, and leaves $1,000? Elena, the owner, had tears in her eyes now too, seeing the profound transformation in Sarah's face. The harsh lines of worry that had been etched there for months had instantly softened, replaced by a look of stunned, fragile hope. Sarah could not take her eyes off the small note, the 12 words that meant more than the money itself. No one should feel invisible. Use this to breathe. A friend who remembers hunger. That phrase, a friend who remembers hunger, was the key. It confirmed that the customer was not a detached wealthy person. This was someone who had intimately known the gnawing fear of scarcity, who truly understood the price of dignity. Sarah realized then, with absolute certainty, who the kind stranger must have been. It wasn't the diamonds or the fame she saw, but the depth of empathy in that famous, gentle voice, the deep recognition in the way her eyes had looked past the uniform and straight into Sarah's quiet sorrow. The woman who had fought so hard to become Marilyn Monroe had never forgotten the heart of Norma Jean. Elena, understanding the delicacy of the situation, gently took the cash and placed it safely in the office till. "This is real, Sarah. It's a blessing. It's what you needed." But Sarah was focused on the note. She carefully folded the small slip of order paper and tucked it into the pocket over her heart. It was a secret vow, a testament to the power of one person's compassion. She imagined rushing home, embracing her husband David, waking him to the impossible news. She pictured calling the landlord, telling him to forget the eviction notice, that the rent was coming in full. Most powerfully, she pictured going to the pharmacy, holding the specialized inhaled medication in her hand, knowing her daughter, Lily, would finally have the relief she needed. The money was a physical transaction, but the note was a spiritual one. For the first time in forever, Sarah took a deep, unrestrained breath, the very act of which felt like a luxury. The tight knot of terror in her stomach finally began to loosen. The crushing financial pressure vanished, vaporized by the quiet grace of a woman who understood the true meaning of an emergency. The sun was just beginning to cast a pale light outside the diner window, signaling the shift to the hopeful morning. Sarah, her eyes still red but her face radiant, was suddenly filled with energy. She had to go home to share the miracle and to make sure this extraordinary act of kindness became the cornerstone of a new beginning. Sarah carefully smoothed down her apron, her hands finely steady. She whispered her own promise into the quiet air of the diner. She would never tell anyone who her generous friend truly was, ensuring the profound act remained completely anonymous, just as Marilyn Monroe had intended. The $1,000 was not spent lavishly. It was deployed strategically, surgically addressing the gaping wounds of financial despair and transforming immediate survival into sustainable dignity. Sarah arrived home just as the sun fully rose, waking her husband David with a desperate, joyful embrace before she even spoke a word. David, his hand still encased in a cast, listened in stunned silence as Sarah recounted the impossible events of the midnight shift, finally showing him the crisp stack of $20 bills and the fragile handwritten note. He read the 12 words, his eyes blurring with relief and reverence. No one should feel invisible. Use this to breathe. A friend who remembers hunger. He knew, without Sarah speaking the name, that only a soul of immense fragile compassion could have performed such an selfless act. The money instantly purchased weeks of the specialized inhaled medication Lily desperately needed, bringing her immediate comfort and stability. The remaining funds were rushed to the landlord's office, silencing the threat of eviction forever. But the greatest investment the money bought was time. Time for David's hand to heal properly, and time for Sarah to be present with her daughter, not constantly haunted by the graveyard shift. Sarah kept the act a profound secret. The owner, Elena, and the cook, George, maintained a respectful silence, knowing the gift was meant to be anonymous. When friends or neighbors asked how they managed to stabilize their situation, Sarah and David simply credited an anonymous family friend who believed in them. The simple lie was designed to protect the true identity of the woman in the borrowed coat. The memory of Marilyn Monroe in the back booth of the Starlight Diner became the central, most cherished story in their family history. The small slip of paper, the original order note, was carefully laminated and kept in a locked box alongside Lily's first baby tooth and David's wedding band. It was a relic of profound human kindness. Sarah would occasionally take it out and read it, especially on nights when the bills looked daunting. The words, "No one should feel invisible," always restored her perspective. The profound impact of the act wasn't the dollar amount, it was the restoration of their faith in humanity. Marilyn had not just given Sarah money, she had given her a profound sense of validation, the knowledge that her unseen struggles mattered. Sarah never saw the star again, and Marilyn never inquired about the outcome of her midnight kindness. The exchange was complete, clean, and perfect in its anonymity. Because of one quiet act performed by a woman seeking her own escape, a family found their footing and their future. The life Sarah and David built from that point forward was a testament to the fact that sometimes the greatest treasures are found not in the spotlight, but in the dimly lit corners of a forgotten diner. Sarah learned the lesson well, and she carried the torch of anonymous grace into her own life, always remembering that the truest kindness is often the one that goes unrecognized, just like the gift left by the friend who remembers hunger. What did Marilyn Monroe truly receive for her $1,000 tip? She received something worth infinitely more than the applause of any premiere, the quiet, cathartic knowledge that her existence had brought dignity to a struggling mother. That midnight stop at the Starlight Diner was never about coffee or pie. It was about the profound human need for genuine connection, a need that fame often starves. Marilyn, surrounded by millions of dollars, was profoundly lonely. She was desperately searching for a reflection of the authentic Norma Jean, the compassionate girl who understood what it meant to struggle, and she found it in the tired, honest eyes of Sarah. The 1,000 tip was not a transaction. It was a desperate, quiet plea for meaning. We often remember Marilyn for the iconic images, the white dress, the breathy voice, the glamorous facade. But the real lesson of the diner is that her most valuable currency was not her star power, but her empathy. She could have written a large check to a major charity earning headlines, but that act would have been tainted by performance. Instead, she chose the most private, least visible path, ensuring that her kindness remained pure, witnessed only by the exhausted waitress and the stars outside. The power of the anonymous gift lay in its perfect timing and perfect understanding. Marilyn did not offer Sarah financial advice. She offered salvation, wrapped in a note that validated Sarah's struggle as an equals experience, a friend who remembers hunger. She used the power of her fame to disappear for an hour and used the depth of her past pain to perform an act of true grace. Years later, Sarah, now stable and thriving, would often recount the story to her daughter, Lily, who grew up strong and healthy. Lily would ask why the famous person would do such a thing. Sarah would simply show her the laminated note, reading the 12 words, and explain the deeper truth. She didn't do it because she was famous. She did it because she remembered what it felt like to be small and afraid. She saw me not as a waitress, but as a person, and she gave me the one thing I couldn't buy, a fresh start. The contrast between the glittering Hollywood premiere and the dimly lit, forgotten diner defines the duality of her life. She was the star who commanded millions, yet she found her deepest fulfillment in a quiet, anonymous act of kindness for a working woman. That night, she didn't just give a tip. She paid the ultimate price for her own escape, buying a few moments of authentic human connection and, in the process, purchasing a lifetime of dignity for another woman. The memory of the midnight diner stop remains a whispered, powerful secret, a testament to the profound and selfless heart of the woman known to the world as Marilyn, but remembered by one grateful waitress simply as a friend. She needed that act, that quiet validation, to believe that her life struggle, the entire journey of Norma Jean, had been worth the pain. That private note signed, "A Friend Who Remembers Hunger," was Marilyn Monroe's single greatest life achievement. The truth of Marilyn's heart wasn't found under a spotlight, but under a coffee cup. If this story of quiet empathy and profound kindness moved you, hit the subscribe button to hear more untold chapters of Hollywood history, and give this video a like so we can keep sharing the human side of the legends.